Okay, well, we're going to kick this off. I want to welcome you to this discussion to understand the reasons behind the explosion of homelessness in the United States. I am a big believer, well, let me start off and say my name is Michelle Stieb. I am running TPPF's new homelessness initiative. We're very, very excited to kick this off and very glad that you are here with us to learn more about it. I'm a big believer personally that people perish without vision. And today in the United States, there are hundreds of thousands of Americans that are perishing because we don't have a vision, homeless Americans, I should say, because we don't have a good vision for them. Today in San Francisco, 4 times the number of people living on the streets are dying from drug addiction and overdose deaths than of COVID. As I mentioned, the explosion in the homelessness population, there's over a 16% increase in the last decade, 21% increase in the unsheltered population, meaning the people who are living on the streets. So today we're going to explore the reasons why this is happening, and in particular, we're going to give you a look into people who enter into homelessness. What is happening with them? What is going on that we need to really look at and help turn this crisis around? I'm very excited to have 3 panelists who are experts in homelessness from a wide variety of perspectives, but are also dear friends of mine. On my right is Art Kleinschmidt. Art is the Deputy Director of ONDCP, the Office of National Drug Control Policy in Washington, D.C. He, prior to his role there, ran recovery centers in Colorado, and today, or actually this month, is celebrating himself 19 years of sobriety. Let's give him a round of applause. He also holds a million other degrees. He's a licensed clinician. He has a PhD in psychology, an MBA, and on top of it, he is a certified public accountant.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
We're glad to have you here. But we're not going to be talking numbers today.
That's good.
Only homelessness explosion numbers. I'm also really excited to have Jennifer Reyes and Sherry Dillon joining us. They're joining us via Zoom. I had the incredible honor and privilege to run a program for 13 years for homeless women and children, and these are 2 women who came through the program and who are shining examples that we should all be looking to for how to get ourselves out of this crisis. So a little bit about Jennifer. Today, she's a property manager. She's been there for 4 years. She's a proud mother, grandmother, and she's a leader in the St. John's Alumni Association, the program that I talked about a little bit earlier. 4 years ago, however, she was at her bottom. She was gripped by anxiety, by addiction, and by homelessness. And we're going to hear a lot more about her story as we move through this discussion. Sherry Dillon today is a hospital services coordinator at Vitalent. She's an active and proud member of her family. She's a grandmother and she's a mother, and she is a real great example for us to look to as well. However, 4 years ago, she was mired in addiction, in homelessness, in criminal activity, and in mental illness, and depression in particular. She dumpster dove for food. This was just 4 years ago. She stole blankets for warmth, and she was eventually booked in county jail for burglary to keep herself warm. These panelists inspire me every day. They've inspired me over these years, and I know they're going to inspire you today and inform you today as to how we work our way out of this crisis. So please welcome them with me. And by the way, we're also very glad to have those of you joining online. I should have mentioned at the beginning. I just want to say we're going to do things a little bit differently in this panel than maybe in traditional panels that you've experienced over the last couple days. One is we're going to use some slides because we really want to share with you some new data, some data that's very disturbing, but very important to understand in terms of the growth in the homelessness crisis and why. But we also want to help reinforce and illustrate some important points in this discussion. So a little different maybe than other panels. Also, though I'm moderating because of the experience I have in working with Jennifer and Sherry, I might be chiming in on a couple areas that moderators might typically not do. So just wanted to share those couple of things with you. So let's segue to our first slide, which is a slide that my co-author and I just recently wrote a book with David Flanagan, whom you saw on the screen maybe earlier, on the homelessness crisis. And we developed this slide, it's a bell curve, because there's a real scary notion out there that has been painted, which is everyone who's homeless is homeless because they don't have a house. And that is not the case. That is not the case. It's part of the case, but there's a much greater story behind each of these individuals. So if you take the left of the bell curve, this is the chronically homeless population, those that are struggling with severe mental illness, physical disability, drug addiction, largely on the streets, but not always on the streets. That makes up about 10 to 20% of the homeless population. It is often perceived to be much greater because it's what we see on the streets, but it is only about 10 to 20% of the population today. On the right side of the bell curve are people who were living on the edge, making it by, but then an event happened. Their car broke down, they couldn't afford to get it fixed, they couldn't get to their job, they lost their job, they couldn't pay their rent, and they lost their housing. Or there was a health issue. A child got sick, a parent got sick, the parent couldn't go to work, and again, lost their job and got pushed over the edge. That makes up today about 10% of the homeless population. I will caveat this and say that with the fallout of COVID, we might see this increase a bit. We're watching that very closely. But that's, about 10% today, or pre-COVID, I should say. The vast majority of the homeless are in the middle of this bell curve. And I want to talk to you a little bit about who they are. They are people that are struggling. It's Jennifer and Sherry. They are people who are struggling with mental illness, with addiction, with criminal history, with lack of education, domestic violence. There's a myriad of issues they're facing, but they can heal from these issues. They can grow and they can become productive members of our community and people that their families can look up to. So the myth is that everyone who is homeless needs a house, and they do need a house eventually, but what they need is healing from what's underlying their homelessness. Art, you have done a lot of work personally, professionally, policy-wise with people in the middle of the bell curve, and can you help us get a picture into who they are and the issues with which they're struggling and how we help them heal?
Sure. First of all, it's kind of hard to generalize a whole subject, a group of people within like a big bell curve like that. So when you're doing like a treatment planning or working in a clinical environment, you generally do like an individual assessment of each body's strengths, weaknesses, and what's going on. But when you hear terms like severe substance use disorder, severe is not like an adjective. It's actually a clinical diagnostic specifier to explain the degree to somebody's life-threatening ailment. The same thing when they say serious mental illness. That's actually like about 4 or 5% of the population. It's generally in your psychosis, sort of a psychotic type of range of mental illnesses. In both circumstances, one of the key factors is the loss of like functionality to actually function in society, keep up with bills, and do those sorts of things, stay with their family. So a lot of times they kind of get pushed out into the street. And I see where Michelle has the word trauma in there. So almost every one of people you're going to meet within this sort of is going to be impacted by trauma. It could be a trauma that started at an early age, or it could be which is common, and it's also going to be the trauma that they engage when they're like living on the street. So life on the street is actually very hard. So you'll sort of see that within the population that you're treating within this regard. And to give you, I know Michelle talks a lot about housing first, right? So one way to kind of look at it is if you took a hospital and then you removed all the medication from the hospital, and then you removed all the medical services from the hospital, I mean, how great would the hospital actually be? So when I was working, and I worked in long-term for very serious sort of disorders, if I wanted to make a referral, somebody's completed treatment, I want them to go to recovery house, sober house, where they have a community, a structured living environment, and let's say they can get one of their parents or benefactors to like weasel out of that recommendation and get their own place or own apartment in town. Inevitably, we ended up with another like sort of crack house in the neighborhood, another shooting gallery where all the other people were running. So all they did was take their dysfunction and put it within some sort of an abode. So every one of these people, if you want to say what they would have in common, they all require services. Especially like with the certain serious mental illnesses, the moment you don't have any kind of structure on them, they'll go off their medicine. That's actually a common trait that they will do. And then they'll end up sort of self-medicating, which invariably goes pretty bad. But that's a lot of what it looks like. And then I'm also a true believer in the power of recovery. If you give people the resources that they need, and you start to kind of coach them and teach them along, they can be healthy, productive citizens. I was incapacitated at one point in time in my life as well. So,
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Jennifer Reyes, you were in the middle of the bell curve. Talk to us about what life was like when you were at your lowest point before you got the help you needed.
I didn't think I was going to ever receive the help. When you deal with PTSD and anxiety and depression, and you spent your whole life dealing with trauma, one after event after another, you kind of begin to lose hope and faith, and you're not quite sure if it's possible to be saved or be able to live a productive life the way um, I believe society expects you to be able to live. And before the program and the help that I received in my life, um, I didn't know quite sure what was going to happen with me. I wasn't quite sure where I was going to see. I had dreams. I've always wanted to be able to be a productive citizen and stay that way. But because I dealt with different things in life, you start creating phobias from some of that trauma. You become afraid of things. Even certain jobs I quit just because of the anxiety. My son got stabbed in 2011. That was like the final tipping point because I spent my whole life trying to get away from it, and it was still always presented right there at the front door. So it caused me to just be scared to live. I wanted to just stay home and protect him, but then I lost my job. I lost a lot of other things, and I'm not quite sure without the help that I received that I would be where I'm at today, basically.
And Jennifer, if I just may ask, what kind of help did you need?
I needed some kind of structure. I needed to understand, first of all, that I had a mental illness. Growing up in the 70s, you don't really hear the words PTSD, anxiety. I didn't even know they had labels to what I had dealt with most of my life, all my life pretty much. And now having a better understanding, I needed the therapy. I needed to be clean from alcohol and drugs, and I needed to be away from any kind of criminal activity, anything negative. But what I needed was structure. What I needed was a continually, even to this day, because of some trauma that you might have in life, it's a lifelong process, and you don't just stop. You continue growing every day, every year, every month, and keep working on that process. And that's kind of what I had to deal with and what I needed in my life. And I needed to be able to feel safe, you know.
Yep. Sherry, talk to us about where you were at your lowest point. And I guess, actually, I want to start off with one question. Getting back to, that point, just for a second, if government had offered you a house for life that had no requirements, where would you be today?
I would be that crack house, that everybody gravitated towards and doing illegal activity and probably in and out of jail and not a productive member of society. That's for darn sure.
Talk to us about that point. What were you struggling with and what were you trying to find help with?
Talk to you about my low point?
Yes.
And what got me. Well, you don't even realize that you're at a low point, for the most part, you're just trying to survive, I was just looking for my next fix, and that was really all my life consisted of. It kind of numbed the pain. I didn't realize I suffered from depression, and I probably suffered from depression my entire life, but I had no idea. I suffered trauma at a very young age. I was molested at a very young age, and I think that formed a lot of my life, through therapy and stuff. I've learned that I've had unhealthy relationships and accepted things that I shouldn't have accepted, and the trauma just continues and spirals and gets bigger and worse, and I've had bouts of sobriety in my life. I kind of deviated off the topic. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
So the question was again.
The lowest.
What kind of help were you offered? Any help when you were out on the streets, and what kind of help did you really need? What kind of help were you offered?
I was never offered help out there. I didn't really even know what help consisted of out there. It just really wasn't anything that occurred to me. I did know God, and when I went to jail the last time, I feel like that was an act of God, and it allowed me a clarity in my mind. And they also put me on antidepressants in jail, which was a godsend, because when I got out, I was able to know that I didn't want to go back there. I didn't want that life, and I checked myself into a program through the county, and I believe I did 90 days. They paid for my bed at a recovery home. But then once my 90 days were up, I had no place to go. And thank goodness I found St. John's. And it was just a uphill journey to where I'm at today because of St. John's.
Thank you, Sherry. So one thing that this really reminded me of, we said this a lot at St. John's, people don't know what they don't know. If you were not raised by someone who was working and living productively and parenting well and addressing your illness, you don't know how to do that. And if you are not in a clear frame of mind, which Jennifer and Sherry and Art all just illustrated, you're not thinking clearly. You don't have a lot of self-awareness. You lack self-awareness in a very significant way. And it's really hard to expect people who lack self-awareness and don't know anything different to make sound decisions. It is really, really hard. So thank you both for sharing, and Art, you too. So we're ready to move to the next slide, which is what is current policy. I want to mention that HUD is the largest funder of homelessness, housing and urban development, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and they drive because of that policy in this area. So if you think back to the bell curve, HUD took a policy that was developed in the 90s and 2000s called Housing First, and it was developed for the very severely chronically homeless, so the folks on the left side of that bell curve, again, making up 10 to 20% of the population. And the thinking was, these people should not be on the streets. It's not good for them. It's not good for society. So how do we get them off the streets quickly? Well, we give them a house, and we don't require anything of them. We don't require them to be sober. We don't require them to engage in services. We just get them off the streets. That for that group of people facing homelessness might make sense. There is there's a lack of evidence in the short term and long term that says that it does, but you can kind of understand the logic there. But in 2011 to 2013, the federal government took this policy developed for this small 10 to 20% of the population, and they broad brushed it across the entire homeless population. Again, this thinking is we're just going to put people in a house and not require anything of them. That's not going to help a Sherry. It's not going to help a Jennifer. It's not going to help the vast majority of people that are in the middle of the bell curve who need to heal from what's underlying their homelessness. So if you look at the results of the policy change in 2011 to 2013, despite HUD promising that Housing First would end homelessness in a decade, they promised it would end homelessness in a decade, we've seen a 16% increase minimum. We've seen a 21% increase in the unsheltered population, despite a 200% increase in spending. 200%. The results are very, very clear, and this chart came from a new report that the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness just released in the fall. I really encourage you to get this report. It's called Expanding the Toolbox. Again, it's by usage, and we'll talk a little bit later about how you might get this out, because this data needs to get out. There is a fallacy out there that Housing First is a best practice, that it's evidence-based, and it clearly doesn't work. The source is usage. Yes, United States Interagency Council on Homelessness. So let's explore why. Art, thinking about this policy and the people in the middle of the bell curve, you used a great analogy about a hospital, but why is this not working for the people, those people in the middle?
For the same reason, people aren't going to get healthy just by having a room in a hospital. They have to have services and that to go along with it. When I saw the two ladies speaking, I do want to add something. There's tremendous resiliency within this population. So everybody comes with strengths, assets, resources that are inherent to them, and they have the ability to build on that if you give them the opportunity to access these resources, to start actually making a life for themselves. Within the program that I'm seeing right here that Michelle laid out, that doesn't exist. There is no tools, and you are not actually allowing somebody to develop these skills and apply it to life where they can find love, joy, and find success. All you're doing is creating really a federal spending program. When I used to get phone calls from people in California, they were calling me a lot, especially like in the Venice Beach area, Los Angeles. And there's a number of policies that are also contributing to a lot of this. Like when you look at Proposition 47 in California, I'm sure y'all are familiar, they basically decriminalized shoplifting. So a number, you can steal anything for $950 and it's just like a misdemeanor ticket. And they're creating like shoplifting gangs out there. So there's a tremendous amount of these sort of programs that aren't helping anybody. You're actually harming people. And when I would work with parents sometimes of a severely substance use disordered sort of child, and I would always sometimes have to break it out so they can understand it, the difference between enabling and helping. And I have like a rule of thumb with that, and I would try to explain it to them this way. If you're putting out efforts to that to like pay their light bill, pay their rent for them, doing these sorts of things that actually alleviate them of any sort of personal responsibility, you're not helping. All you're doing is clearing the pathways for them to be more self-destructive and get sicker as they sort of go on.
Well, and I would say not on a long-term basis, right? If you're helping them on a short-term basis to be able to...
That was only half. The other half of the equation is if you're helping them get set up to like in a recovery house, covering it, whatever, to where the help that you're giving them is towards a road of self-sufficiency, you're helping. If you're working on them to where they could actually get sicker, you're enabling the disease and you're allowing the disease to fester. And I look at these programs, and that's really sort of how it looks to me. And I really, something I wanted to do was like a big roundtable event on the differences between enabling and helping. Because when I look at a lot of the federal policies, state policies, they look to me to be more on the enabling side, right?
Yep.
Personal responsibility isn't really showing up. And you're actually dehumanizing somebody when you take the personal responsibility away from them. And when somebody's on the road towards recovery, I used to tell them, like, let's start looking at sort of like small victories, small successes. Hey, I got up today, I did this, I got up, I worked on that, to where you start building back your life that sort of a way.
Yep. So adding to that, this whole notion that there's a one-size-fits-all solution for 1.1 million Americans who struggle with a disease, it's crazy. It's like saying, if everyone in this room had cancer, there's one drug that you can take. It doesn't matter what kind of cancer you have, doesn't matter what kind of body you have, it does not work. There isn't a one-size-fits-all. Art mentioned the difference between enabling and helping, and this is clearly an enabling policy. People like Jennifer and Sherry are now out on their own. They pay for their own housing. They do their own, they're working, they're growing in their jobs, they're paying their own bills, their kids are thriving. We're not doing this for them. Yet if Sherry and Jennifer, and let me ask this question of both of you, Sherry and Jennifer kind of asked us a little bit of Sherry, but if you were in the state you were in at your lowest point and government came to you and said, hey, here's a free house for life and you don't have to do anything, what would you accept it? No, well, it's your lowest point, like when you were in your addiction, right? Would you have
Correct.
accepted the house?
No.
Oh,
My mind would have been like, yeah, sure, let's do this. I will take it. But
Yeah.
not dealing with the inside stuff that was going on, my anxieties, whatever, I would not have been able to keep it. I would have been able to repeat the cycle of homelessness. My kids would have had to suffer from it at that time. I had 2 of my kids living with me, and no, I don't believe that housing first would have worked for me.
Yeah.
As much as I might have wanted it and much as I might have tried to accept it, I would have had to face reality. And the reality was I had to focus on me. I had to fix the inside stuff that was going on, and to get to a point where I can keep the house, where I can keep a job after a year and not quit, or have some other things come up to where I can
Yeah.
continue to keep working. And that was my main focus in finding St. John's. I really believe I was directed there because of my higher power. I believe in God. And no matter how much I wanted a job or a house at that time, he needed me to fix me. He gave me the right people and the right tools and the right kind of programming that I needed to be able to be self-sufficient.
Yep.
I've worked all my life, but I've never stayed at a job or a home for more than a certain amount of time. And I can probably say today, even though I'm now older, but because I allowed myself to accept the help, like Sherry was saying, you don't know how to look for help. You just survive. You're just out there surviving. I lived off food lockers. I lived off of hopefully HEAP or some kind of Salvation Army help with my utilities. I've always was just trying to find a way to survive. So actually, to be able to be where I'm at now, I've been at my job for 4 years. I'm paying my rent. I'm working
Wow.
I'm living in a place for, like, I have accommodated so much that I've actually dreamed for so long. So no, I can't say that giving me a house first would have worked without all the other tools and understanding that I've actually have these. Like Sherry said, you didn't know you had depression. Well, I didn't understand that I have ACEs, basically some childhood trauma that continued on to my life, and I've always dealt with it by anxiety or avoidance or using or denial.
Yeah.
So
Sherry, do you
until
have?
I became more aware of what I needed to do and how to deal with these things that came up in my life, and I was a high school dropout, so I needed to focus on education, but I never gave myself the time to do that or to find other opportunities to do things other than just survive.
Sherry, do you have any thoughts to add here?
about whether or not a free house would have been accepted by me in my lowest point, heck yeah, it would have been accepted. And it would have been one heck of a party house. I mean, truth be told, yeah, I would have totally accepted it. And would I be where I'm at today? Would I be a member of my family? Would I have a job? Would I be clean and sober? Would I be healthy? Heck no. I'd probably be dead. I probably would have died. Truth be told.
Yep. Thank you, both. Let's go on to the next slide. The third reason that, or one of the other significant reasons that Housing First is failing, starts with this slide. So we kind of liken the system to an inn, right? So back before Housing First was rolled out to everyone, there was about 700,000 beds in the inn. We funded shelter beds, we funded transitional housing beds, we funded permanent housing beds, which again is the lifelong subsidized housing, but mostly shelter and transitional. It was costing us about $4 billion a day, and I think a really important point here is that if you look at the inn, there are people coming in every day, right? People enter into homelessness, but there's people leaving the system. They are leaving the system like Sherry and Jennifer did. They're self-sustaining, and it's about the same number of people entering and leaving, and that was our system before Housing First was rolled out. Let's segue to the next slide, please. Today, is that everything? Yeah, okay, today we've got 900,000 beds in the inn. All of the new beds, which by the way cost us about 200, which were afforded by a 200% increase in spending, all those new beds are permanent supportive housing beds. They are lifelong subsidized housing. The transitional housing beds are almost all done away with. So transitional means you are here for a year or two, it's a hand up, we help get you healed, and you're off on your own. We did away with almost all those beds. They were replaced by permanent supportive housing beds. And I shouldn't even say they're permanent supportive housing. It's not, there's no support there. It's just a subsidized house. And what's happened is, again, increase in 16% of homelessness across the country, increased by 21% in the unsheltered population. But as you'll see here, and I hope this illustration makes it clear, the inn has grown. People are still trying to come in, but no one's leaving. So the inn is full. We have created a completely unsustainable system. And it's really, really unfortunate, and again, not working.
Well, it breeds dependency.
Yep.
Right,
Absolutely.
not self-sufficiency. So when you, the transition is just what it is. I personally lived in 2 different recovery houses, but it's. I used to kind of refer to it when I want my clients to go to it. It's almost like a way station to where it's a good measure to start to use the community, the people around you who are getting into recovery, the resources with them, to start building a life for yourself. But a reason I would call it a way station is that you weren't supposed to reside there for the rest of your life. It's all about trying to get back on your feet again, utilizing your abilities, talents, and applying it towards life. And that's what actually gives somebody, like the 2 ladies we just saw, who had 4 years in a job. That's amazing. And it's St. John sounds like a wonderful program, but it's all about kind of getting back on your feet and utilizing the abilities and skills that you have.
Yep.
It's not about just trying to be holed up in some sort of government assisted residence.
Yes, and to your point, Art, I often call this system today a straitjacket into dependency and homelessness. I mean, it straitjackets the people that it sucks in. They never leave, as you can see from this slide. And it brings up another point for you as well, and that is when you hear someone say, we're going to end homelessness, turn around and run as fast as you can in the other direction. I'm an optimist, but we will never end homelessness. The reality is people enter that system every day. They will continue to enter it. We can end homelessness for an individual 100%. You see it with Sherry and Jennifer. I've seen it in thousands of cases. We can absolutely do that, but we will never end homelessness. And it's just such a we're setting ourselves up for failure when we say that.
May I chime in real quick?
Absolutely, Jen.
Now that I've got the opportunity to work as a property manager, one of the things I've seen working with some local programs here that are not long-term. For example, we have a program called VOA where they will help people pay rent for a certain amount of time. But some of the tenants, well, for example, I had a couple of tenants who depended on that program and they paid almost up to 7 to 9 months of their rent. But I also saw them still dealing with their addictions, still dealing with their whatever it was that created them to have the issues of being homeless and needed them services in the first place. So even after 7 or 9 months of having somebody pay their rent, when that 7 to 9 months came up and their rent was no longer going to be paid, they struggled. They struggled really hard, and it was unfortunate that we have now had to put them back out on the street because they were no longer able to pay their rent. And here the program didn't offer any other services to them other than, well, if you get back into another place, maybe we can still help you futurely. But now they now have an eviction on their name because they're no longer able to provide for themselves. They weren't taught to be able to how to provide themselves. Nothing, even if it was just some money management, self-assurance, therapy, AOD, any of other type of programs that or therapy that could have helped these young ladies to not become another number of being homeless. Now, it doesn't happen to all of them, but just a few that I've worked with, and even including Section 8. It's a great program for some, but then once your child gets a certain age, some parents no longer have that stability of having Section 8 paid for them, or some of them still struggle with being accountable with just paying $200 rent. Like they don't have any money management. They're wasting it on either drugs, or they don't know how to save, or their bills get ahead of the game. So they're robbing Peter to pay Paul. So now rent is something they're avoiding. So, having some kind of support, like a long-term program, like I said, it's not something that just happens in 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. This is something that goes on even after. I spent a good almost 2 years of my life with St. John's, and I still continue to make sure that I get the help that I need through Kaiser and through other programs that I know can help keep me on the right path of staying a productive citizen.
Yep. Sherry, do you have anything you want to add here?
No.
Okay.
You have to ask me a question. My brain goes.
No, but along those lines, it's one of the things we used to kind of like call the soft skills, right? That people are going to need after they're kind of coming from like a life of addiction or mental illness. But like how to go, you'll be surprised, but like how to go and fill out the application. And you're kind of say, go get 5 of them, and I would make them as because I worked in transition. Go get me 5 applications. I want you to bring them back here, and I want to kind of see you sort of filling them out, and then you're going back, and then you're going to go back and check on it. And some of the other things, it's like, it sounds easy, but if you're used to like just living the way you live as, somebody in active addiction, like showing up on time, being accountable at the job, being responsible. These are the things they have to sort of be taught and worked on, and it's like skills that need to be exercised. And it's all about developing a life for yourself and not being dependent. So, and it's really what starts to kind of build self-esteem, self-efficacy, pride in oneself, those sorts of things that are like vitally important.
And Art, you bring up such a great point. I said earlier, we don't, our clients don't know what they don't know, and we can't. You have to start at the basics. And do you guys remember Sandy? Anyway, Sandy came into our program. She had lost custody of her son. She was struggling with addiction and domestic violence, and we eat as a community at St. John's, or I'm not there anymore, but as a community at St. John's they eat, and tables, and Sandy described this experience to me. One of her first nights, someone said, "Sandy, you're chewing with your mouth open and it sounds horrible." And Sandy said, what do you mean? And in Sandy's life, she was one of 9 kids. Her mom left the house when she was like 3 years old, and the dad was working 2 jobs. And, you know, it was a free-for-all house. They never ate at a table together. Sandy never knew that she was supposed to chew with her mouth closed. You can't underestimate how much we need to start at the basics. And I'm really glad you brought up that point. So we're at Q&A time. Actually, if we can go to the last slide. I just want to, the final slide I meant. Sorry, not the last. Yeah, right there. We're going to get to this because we want to leave you with what we're going to be doing and how you can help us. But we want to turn the floor over to you, and we're all available for questions. Yes, right here.
So I am really impressed with the talent you put to here. We got a man who's been involved. You've got real life stories, and you've got yourself who's crazy enough to join TPPF. And so I look at this as a perfect opportunity. But what I want to emphasize here is that, you know, TPPF, if for a person who shows up just now recently, you might mistakenly think that TPPF stands for Texas Partisan Policy Foundation, okay? But no, it stands for Texas Public Policy, okay? And so this is across the aisle conversation. Absolutely. We can spend the next 50 years snarling over who does what first and how we're going to get it done. But I want to call to arms that we go across the aisle and we get this thing fixed. The reason I say that is I have a personal problem. Last month, my brother was murdered. He lived in a high-rise, a really nice condo. Went down to get food for his family at the Chinese place that he always does. He was attacked and killed by a young man, not yet 30, who had been released because he was crazy, let's argue, from a previous assault situation. And now he's got a couple felonies, murdered, but due process has to take place. So there are chronic issues, and I'm not trying to solve anything, but I have an emotional investment, and we got to quit partisan back and forth. This is the place to get across the aisle and get it done.
Absolutely. Do you have a question as well? I'm so sorry to hear about your brother.
Yeah, what are you going to do about it?
We're going to get to that slide. It's not going to be fixed overnight, though. Let me just say that, because it, yes.
I'm sorry for your loss. I kind of think, look at myself as a little bit blessed, and you know, DC's been crazy lately. I work in the White House, but my issue is like a nonpartisan, bipartisan issue. I was actually plucked to kind of work on the opioid crisis and mental health policy. So when I was working at DPC, we worked in mental illnesses, and now we worked in craft executive orders. So there's no family that's or you made it so you won't be impacted by mental illness, right? Or you're got so high on the economic spectrum, then drug addiction won't affect you. So it's an issue that cuts across all of America and all socioeconomic groups. So you're right, it's a bipartisan issue. And that's how we sort of approached it. And of course, I have my own ideas as what would be the best policy recommendations to go by. But even in my clinical work, they wouldn't know what my politics were when I was working with my clients, and that's for good reason. That you don't bring that into like a clinical setting.
Next question. Yeah.
This question is for Art.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here.
Is that on? It's not. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, my first question is, what do you do with people on drugs who don't want help, who don't want to get off drugs? Do you have to separate them from the people who would actually want some help and respond and have better lives?
You know, it's a little bit of a myth. When somebody's like, say you have a treatment center, not everybody shows up at treatment for the same reason. And so if somebody would like come to treatment, and just because they're in treatment doesn't mean they want to quit doing drugs. Sometimes they're kind of like coerced into treatment. And then sometimes the guy who's all motivated and self-refers and comes into treatment, I'm ready to turn over a new leaf and live this way, that guy could fall by the wayside at any moment when he realizes, wait, I got to get up at 7:30 in the morning. Wait, wait, you want me to do this now? This isn't this. And the person who's sometimes coerced into treatment, sometimes their eyes will open up. And then they'll actually say, wow, there is a new way to live, and I really am bright and shiny and sort of ready to kind of move forward. So that's why I kind of go with, sometimes you need like an intervention type of strategy to kind of like give some people the opportunity to have their eyes open. But to your point, that's the number one reason why we have a treatment gap. People don't quite always want to.
Well, they're not ready. It's a timing thing. And
Yeah.
the Salvation Army, does good work with
They
the
do.
homeless. But they
I'm a
have an
big fan.
expectation. You don't get help. You don't come in here unless you're ready for
Right.
your help. And so maybe that's the key. And I don't know if you separate people who aren't ready and you say,
Well,
you're
an
not ready.
inpatient, when somebody's used, then you would separate them, right? Because there's a contagious type of element to it. But like even at the Salvation Army, a wonderful program, somebody can have their mind made up today, I'm going to be sober, and tomorrow, yeah. So, I mean, there's going to be that. So you want to keep working with them along sort of the continuum of care. Yeah.
But there are always rules of expectation.
Yes.
Absolutely.
You start with the needle, you've got to leave because we have people
No,
who are going to be successful.
Right, and that would require like, a discharge, that sort of a planning. But if somebody's using in a certain inpatient, yeah, you would have to extract that person from the community. Sometimes on an outpatient treatment, you kind of work with them a little bit different, so. But yeah, point well taken, thank you.
But I also just want to add, and actually, Dr. Drew talks about this, but there's actually a condition, I think it's called
Yeah, I was going to say that,
Okay. Yeah, I know.
anagnosia.
Yeah.
So like that's a lot in the mental health world, anagnosia. If somebody doesn't know how sick they really are. I mean, also like in the drug world, sometimes we call it denial, but a little bit in the mental health world, dealing with serious mental illness, agnosia. I'm not saying it
I know.
correctly either.
It's
But
hard.
somebody with like severe schizophrenia, they don't always sort of get it, and they think they're feeling well, feeling fine, and then they'll fight with you on their medicine and that sort of thing.
But also, Jennifer and Sherry both said, right, they didn't know that they had depression or anxiety. They didn't realize, they didn't have a clear mind, and they could not self-diagnose, which is so common.
In addiction itself is a disease of perceptions. So perceptions get way out of whack.
And I think
disease.
that when you are in your addiction, if I may speak,
Yes.
you are in a fight or flight
Yeah.
type of mindset, and that's a totally different mindset than what I live today. That it does creep in sometimes, especially when I'm scared or when something triggers, certain things in me. But today I have the ability to think through consequences of my actions. And when you are in your addiction, consequences and actions they're not there,
A great
So I
point,
think
Sherry.
getting the clarity with my medicine and just getting clarity, brings a whole different lifestyle and a whole different brain function,
Yeah.
Thank you, Michelle,
the
for
ability to be able
coming
to,
today. I
like,
saw you on a
when
live
being
stream. Oh, I'm
Oh,
sorry.
sorry. Go ahead, Jen. Sorry.
I didn't hear.
Sorry. But I was gonna say, being homeless, I utilize this program down here, which is Loaves of Fishes, where you see a lot of the homeless, we go to eat, they have a place there to get sanitary napkins and hygiene products and things like that nature. But you also had a little clinic called Genesis where they would try to help intervene with a lot of the homeless and their addiction and the mental illness, but you don't really have, and unfortunately, most counties expect you to have some kind of Medi-Cal or some kind of way to be able to pay for some of these services. Not everything is always offered to you on a level of being free. So if the person who has an addiction doesn't have a way to be able to help get their addiction taken care of or see a therapist. I'm sure some of the addictions, just from my parents, for example, they had underlying conditions that I'm sure they avoided by trying to be functional drug using parents. Like they made things seem better than what it really was, and they did worked hard at not trying to understand that they might have things that they needed to deal with by trying to live this American dream that we weren't living. Like what they were doing was creating me and my sister to have these anxieties and depressions and to see things life different when trauma and events started coming up in our life. We didn't know how to handle them because we were what I thought functional. So when things happen, what are we were supposed to do? And especially into my adult life where I didn't have Medi-Cal or I didn't have a job that helped gave me the benefits I need to be able to go and just get the help that I'm now receiving from Kaiser right now. But you know, just so many people out there probably do deal with addiction, and I'm sure a lot of them deal with addiction to escape for their mind. But if they don't have anything to help any of that, then what are they supposed to do?
Yeah. Thank you, Jen. That was good. Yes.
Yes, thank you for coming, Michelle. I saw you in a live stream earlier last year, I assume it was, and where we were talking about this topic, and I thought that was very good. So thank you for coming. About your bell curve, I wanted to ask you a little bit about that. You said on the left side that you had described that population 10 to 20%. I got illness and addicted. Is that correct?
So it's been labeled different things over the years because the definition changes, but we call it the severely chronically homeless.
Okay.
They are struggling with very significant mental illness, significant addiction, and a lot of times very significant physical disabilities.
Disability. Okay, great. And and just as a personal note, through the church we had gone around and given out little emergency kits to homeless people in our neighborhoods, and I took that opportunity to interview many of them myself. Mm-hmm. And I was really taken aback when one of them told me that I always ask them where they're from and why they're there, and the one man said to me that he thought that it was a lifestyle, and this goes back to the previous question about people who don't want help. Where does that fit in your segmentation there? That population?
People that are living on the streets because of the lifestyle.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you might remember, and I'm going to turn this over to Art too. When I described that group on the left side, and I need to step back and say too, and Art mentioned this, we at St. John's, and I firmly believe you have to look at every individual as an individual, right? But we developed that bell curve because there was just such this misconception that it's all about housing, and so we tried to share that in that illustration. But there are people that are on the streets because they're avoiding the criminal justice system, or they're avoiding their child care subsidies that they should be paying, right? There's other reasons why people are on the streets. I believe we need to get to a point where that's not an option. The option is different programs, but those programs are not going to all, I would never say they would look like St. John's. To take someone off the streets who's been there for 10 or 20 years, who's used to the lifestyle of no one telling them what to do, and they perceive it to be freedom. I would argue it is the most straitjacketed existence, but they may need a program. I'm a believer in sanctioned encampments with rules and structure, but it will not have the level of rules and structure that a St. John's has, because that will never work. They will come in and they will go out. We're not there right now, but we need to get to a point where it's not an option to live on the street. That's not how we conduct business in America. But it is going to be a slow process, and we do need to meet people where they are. Yes. Oh, sorry.
So, of the many questions I would love to spend the time asking, I'm gonna, I think, pick this one. So, what do you think, and this would be a question for all of the panelists, what would y'all say is one of the most effective things that you could do to prevent homelessness from happening in the first place? I realize we've listed a lot of causes, like with the bell curve, 80% being this and this. Which ones of those might be most prominent causes, and what might be the most effective things in your, from your perspective, to prevent that? I think that's the only question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Art, do you want to take that one?
Well, it's a multifaceted thing. I know that they've mentioned, you know, like trauma in the home is like huge sometimes, or trauma, or being, I don't say abandonment or other kind of attachments, just things that kind of go on in early development. But I would, and a lot of times, unfortunately, dysfunction can kind of sort of be like an inherited trait that comes down the family line. But what I would sort of go with a prevention program is, I would say, like early psychoeducation or early sort of interventions on people before they get to the severe range would be the number one thing to do. At the program I'm at right now, we have the Drug-Free Communities, which is a grant program that works through the school. We also we're working on like SBIRT, which is screening. It's a lot about early intervention. And try to get the problems before they develop into sort of like a big thing like that. And if you could get to, especially in the adolescent sort of age or whatever like that, if you could kind of get to them at that point in time, you could actually show them that there's a whole nother track of development before they start to get off and veer off onto what really would be like a self-destructive type of behavior pattern. And a little bit, to get back to the other question, like sometimes people, you know, I've had them, you know, I don't, your story, but they could be even a little bit proud of their ability to live on the street and scrap out a living for themselves, right? So they will even let me know how good they were at that. But, and there's a little bit of an allurement sometimes. You know, you look at the drugs and the alcohol and that, but the lifestyle, living that sort of lifestyle is probably, it's alluring to people too. So I don't, you know, I don't mind coerce treatment here and there, depending on where somebody is. I've seen somebody come out of a jail cell who may not have wanted treatment, and then that person performs beyond their own belief and beyond anybody else's belief there. So whether somebody really wants it at the moment, I generally sort of like try to work through that as a clinician. So that, you know, so it's like multifaceted. You got to look at somebody as they come in there. They all have their own like core issues. You got to kind of work on that as they kind of go. And a lot of times, that's why I believe in the community, supportive community. They'll get it from their peers. Can actually, a guy that doesn't want to get sober, we'll hook him up to a peer who actually been there, has done that, and gotten sober. That's a very eye-opening experience too.
Yeah. So we have 2 minutes. Maybe quick question, and then I just want to get back to that last slide. Oh. Oh.
So you guys have done a nice job of talking about how to help individuals become unhomeless. It seems we've given our public spaces to these kind of people, and so I can't take my grandchildren to parks and things like that, take them downtown in the evening. What are we going to be able to do about that? So the rest of society would like to use the public spaces.
Well, that is a fantastic segue into our last slide, and because of time, can we get to our last slide? Yes. I'm not going to read these points, but we, TPPF, just launched this initiative because we are going to be fixing this problem, and unfortunately at the federal level, there's not a lot of opportunity with the incoming administration to change policy because it was their policy at the get-go that fueled this. But we are going to work here in Texas to make Texas a model state, and we want to work with you on that. I there's points in here that you can read, and we'll keep this up. If you want to stay afterwards, we'll be here to talk. But I just want to close with the fact that we do have a vision for the homeless in this initiative, and that is that they can become all that they are intended to be, and we need your help in getting them there and getting us there. So thank you so much for your time. Like I said, yeah. Yeah, it's bullet points, yes. Again, I don't have time to read them all. You don't need me to read them all. We wanted to end on time. But Jennifer, Sherry, do you have anything you want to say and close real quick? It has to be quick.
I just want to say, continue the good work that you're doing. To answer the question before, this gentleman here, people need to start being accountable for their actions. They have to be responsible. I believe art, like he said, start at an early age as much as possible. A lot of my probably could have prevented had I had got some of the, I'm sorry, I got a brain fart real quick. At 15, 16, I noticed a lot of things starting to happen in my life, and had I had an intervention at that time, or been held accountable for some of my actions, or been being able to understand what was actually going on in my life, I probably would have made less of some of the mistakes that I made as going into my adult life. So I feel like, yes, make people be accountable for their actions and in therapy, and don't give up. Don't give up on them, because that's the biggest problem right now, is because a lot of people feel like they don't have anybody, nobody understands or anything like that, and they lose faith, they lose sight, and they kind of become lost.
Michelle,
Yes.
I'd like to say that Texas is very, very lucky to have you, and we miss you here in California. And if the program you created could save my life like it did, and Jennifer's and countless other women that I know, we have a life beyond our wildest dreams, and we have tools and skills, and we have tools in our toolbox to deal with life's challenges. You know, life is challenging even when you're not on drugs. You know, life can be even more challenging, right? Mm-hmm. And if you just follow this young lady, Michelle Steve, Texas is going to be okay.
You are crazy. I love ya.